at the moment we have about 60% under forest cover, and this has been diminishing at the rate of about 0.7 or 0.6% over the past 30 years. In comparison to other countries which have deforestation also as a menace, so our deforestation rate is in fact quite low. And in comparison, I think France has got 30% forest cover, Germany 30%, and the United Kingdom about 10%. Well, forestry was such a big industry in Sabah when we first started as an independent country within Malaysia. It was something like 90% of the GDP or 90% of the government revenue came from forestry. But over the years, as a consequence of conservation efforts and deliberate policies and of course depletion, forestry only represents about 5% of the revenue for the state government in direct terms. However, in the beginning, we were only talking about direct income. The other benefits of forests were not taken into consideration as much, such as the environmental services in terms of biodiversity, water supply, genetic resources, and so on. But forestry, conservation are in fact more important now, although these are now intangible benefits. As far as direct economic benefits, it is a pale shadow of itself. Oil palm is important in many ways. Firstly, it has resulted in great socio-economic development for the state. It has become a substitute for revenue generation for the government of Sabah. It has provided thousands of jobs. It has uplifted people from abject poverty. And without oil palm, so many of our conservation efforts would not have been able to be financed. And I think this is a very, very important consideration. We certainly have strong rules, strong laws. We have the forest enactment that takes care of the management of our forests. We have the environmental impact assessment requirement before oil palm can be developed or before forests can be converted into other uses. But despite all those laws, there are areas where you need improvements, particularly in the enforcement of these laws. I'm not too worried about forest management, but it is definite that the oil palm industry has got to improve on its standards and operations on the ground. There is a law called the Wildlife Conservation Enactment, which takes care of the conservation and protection of wildlife in Sabah. In addition, we have the forest enactment itself, which also takes care of the management of forests and the habitats of wildlife. We have an initiative in Sabah called the Great Ape Survival Project, or GRAPS, which is defined under the United Nations Environmental Programme as a model area for the conservation of great apes. And this area encompasses about 300,000 hectares of both virgin and log-over forests surrounding the conservation area of Danam Valley. This area is certified. It has been dedicated specifically for orang-outans, and logging stopped some 10 years ago as a consequence of deliberate policy to conserve and manage orang-outans in their natural habitat. And I must tell you, my point is this: if the orang-outan is going to survive as a species on this earth, it has got the greatest likelihood of happening in Sabah. We must look at the issues at hand. Why are people calling for boycott of oil palm? Is oil palm inherently bad? Or is it about practices on the ground, or are we talking about something more sinister? Because oil palm is such a competitive oil crop, and you can't compete with oil palm on a level playing field, then the issues are distorted. And one way of distorting the issues is calling for boycotts and so on. This will not help anybody. It will not help the environment. It will not help NGOs or the government or the people in society at large. Simply because if you remove an important crop like oil palm, you're going to affect the livelihoods of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. That's one. And if oil palm is no longer a crop that can be sold in the international market, people will look for alternatives that will equally destroy the environment, but of lower value. That means greater areas will have to be opened up. And thirdly, you need income. And if you have set aside a piece of land for the purpose of conversion into a crop, you have to go for a crop that gives you the highest socio-economic return. And oil palm at the moment is that crop that gives the greatest return. And the income that comes from that can be plowed back into conservation efforts. You can't have conservation with no financing of it. And oil palm is one industry in Malaysia, in particular Sabah, which has plowed in substantial amount of money for conservation, forest restoration, wildlife management, and so on. If I could speak for Sabah, Sabah is one place where you can see that conservation efforts, forest conservation, conservation of ecosystems, with oil palm as part of land management is successfully done. You have the oil palm complementing forest management and forest conservation by providing the financing that the government needs in order to manage forests. And at the same time, you have oil palm companies who directly finance the conservation efforts being undertaken by agencies like the Forestry Department or the Wildlife Department. At the same time, we are going for certification. Quite a bit of Sabah's oil palm estates are now being certified under the standard like the RSPO, for instance. And that is a reassurance in itself, where you have credibility and independent auditing to assure consumers that things have improved so much over the years. I'm not saying that everything is good. There is the good, the bad, and the ugly about the oil palm industry. So what we need to do is to shift practices on the ground. The policies have been settled long ago. We know what's for oil palm, what's for agriculture, and what's for conservation. It is now the practices on the ground that needs improvement, and that continues to improve, and certification will give us that reassurance.